Imani's world was small, defined by the cracked sidewalks of her neighborhood and the love for her little brother. With a few coins clutched in her hand, she set out to buy him a birthday treat, a mission that seemed simple enough. But when she found herself a few pennies short, a kind stranger intervened, his one act of generosity a quiet promise of a different kind of future. She couldn't have known that this simple transaction would be the first step on an extraordinary journey, one that would take her from a corner store to the corner office of a global empire. Her destiny, it turned out, was written not in the stars, but in a moment of kindness over a chocolate bar. If you liked the video and have subscribed to my channel, let's move on to our story. Enjoy watching. The summer sun bore down on the cracked asphalt of the street, baking the air until it shimmered. For 10-year-old Imani, the heat was a constant companion, a heavy blanket that settled over their small two-bedroom apartment. From her spot on the fire escape, where a wisp of a breeze sometimes dared to venture, she could watch the world unfold below. The symphony of the neighborhood was a familiar tune, the rhythmic bounce of a basketball, the sharp bark of a dog, the distant echoing shouts of kids playing tag. She knew every note by heart. Imani's world was small, but it was full. It was full of the love she had for her little brother Malik, who at 5 years old, was a whirlwind of giggles and boundless energy. It was full of the worn-out books she borrowed from the small, underfunded community library, their pages soft and dog-eared from countless other hands. It was full of the savory scent of her mother's cooking, a meager meal stretched to feed 4 people, but always made with a care that transcended their poverty. It was full of the quiet determination she saw in her father's eyes, a man who worked 2 jobs just to keep a roof over their heads, his hands calloused but his touch always gentle. Her family lived on the razor's edge of need, a constant low-level anxiety that hummed beneath the surface of their lives. A broken-down car was a disaster, an unexpected medical bill a catastrophe. But Imani was a natural-born optimist, a child who found joy in the smallest of things. She saw the beauty in the chipped paint on the windowsill, the patterns in the tangled cables that snaked between the buildings, and the way the streetlights cast long dramatic shadows at dusk. Her greatest source of joy, however, was Malik. He was the sun and moon of her existence, and her every action revolved around him. She was his protector, his storyteller, and his biggest fan. She would fashion paper planes for him that never flew quite right and tell him stories about faraway lands, weaving narratives from the scraps of information she gleaned from her books. He in turn adored her. He'd follow her around the apartment, his small hand clutched in hers, his bright, curious eyes mirroring her own. One of their favorite rituals was their nightly treasure hunt. After her parents had gone to bed, Imani would sneak into the kitchen and pull out a secret stash of a few coins. They would sit on the worn rug, counting the pennies and nickels, imagining what they could buy with their tiny fortune. A new toy for Malik? A fresh carton of milk? The list was endless, the possibilities as vast as the universe itself, but the reality was always the same. The money would go back into its hiding spot, a small buffer against the ever-present threat of a leaky faucet or a light bulb that refused to flicker back to life. Today, as she sat on the fire escape, her thoughts drifted to Malik's birthday, which was just a week away. Her heart ached with the desire to give him something special, something just for him. He never asked for anything, and that only made her want to give him more. She knew a brand new toy was out of the question. Even a second-hand one would cost more than their entire treasure fund. But there was one thing, a simple luxury that she knew would make his eyes light up: a chocolate bar. Not just any chocolate bar, but the big one with the creamy caramel and crunchy nuts, the one they only ever saw on the television commercials. The very thought of it sent a jolt of hope through her. Her parents had forbidden them from using their secret stash for treats. "It's for emergencies, Imani," her mother had said sternly, her voice tired from the day's labor. "You never know when we might need it." Imani understood, she truly did. But the idea of seeing that wide, delighted smile on Malik's face was too powerful to ignore. She made up her mind. Tonight, after the house was quiet, she would take a small loan from their treasure. She would go to Mr. Henderson's corner store, a place she rarely visited, and she would buy the biggest, most beautiful chocolate bar she could find. She had to. For Malik. But as the sun began its slow descent, painting the sky in fiery hues of orange and purple, a different kind of thought crept into Imani's mind. She was fluent in the rhythm of her neighborhood, in the nuances of her family's love, but she was also fluent in the world of words. It was a secret passion, a talent she'd never shared with anyone. She would sit for hours with her head buried in her books, not just reading the stories but tasting the words on her tongue, repeating the foreign phrases she found in the margins and footnotes, trying to make them sound like the ones she heard on the television. She would mimic the newscasters who spoke in rapid-fire French and the characters in the movies who whispered in a language she'd later learn was Spanish. It was a compulsion, an urge that she couldn't explain, a hunger for the unknown. Imani didn't know why she was so drawn to languages. Maybe it was a way of building bridges to places she could only dream of, a way of understanding worlds she might never see. Or maybe it was just a strange, beautiful part of who she was. She had no way of knowing, of course. All she knew was that the thrill of a new word, the satisfaction of stringing together a coherent phrase in a foreign tongue, was a quiet joy that was entirely her own. As night fell and the stars began to poke through the inky blackness, Imani made her way back inside, the weight of her secret mission and her hidden passion heavy on her young shoulders. The night was still young and the chocolate bar was still waiting for her. The night air was a welcome relief, carrying with it the scent of blooming jasmine from a neighbor's small pot on the stoop and the faint, sweet smell of burnt sugar from a nearby bakery. Imani waited until the soft, rhythmic sound of her father's snores filled the apartment, a lullaby that meant it was safe to move. She crept out of her bed, the worn floorboards a symphony of creaks under her careful steps. Malik was a lump under his blanket, his breathing even and deep, a sight that filled her with a quiet love. Her mission was for him and for him alone. She tiptoed into the kitchen, a place of order and routine, and knelt by the old wooden pantry. Behind the cans of beans and dried pasta was a loose floorboard. This was their bank, their treasure chest, the only thing standing between them and a small but significant luxury. She slid her fingers into the cool, dark space and pulled out the small cloth pouch. It was heavy with the weight of her family's hopes and fears, and a jolt of guilt ran through her. Her mother's face flashed in her mind, her tired eyes and the serious set of her mouth as she'd said, "It's for emergencies, Imani." This wasn't an emergency, not in the way her mother meant. But in her heart, she knew this was a different kind of urgency. This was for a smile, for a moment of pure, unadulterated happiness. This was for Malik. She carefully counted out the coins, her small fingers deft and precise. The chocolate bar, she remembered from her one and only visit to Mr. Henderson's store, cost just over $1. She needed exactly $1.50 to be safe. She took exactly that, leaving the rest for the next unexpected twist life might throw at them. The coins felt warm in her palm as she slipped them into the pocket of her shorts. Clutching a small, well-worn book in her other hand, a shield and a comfort, she quietly slipped out the back door and into the street. The night was alive. The usual chorus of the neighborhood had been replaced by a more intimate hum. Porch lights cast soft, yellow pools on the sidewalk, and the distant wail of a police siren served as a lonely counterpoint to the city's quiet rhythm. Imani walked with her head held high, a purposeful stride that belied her 10 years. She passed familiar faces, people who had known her since she was a baby, and exchanged quiet nods. Mr. Jones, who sat on his porch every night nursing a cup of tea, gave her a small, knowing smile. He saw her not as a child from the poor side of the street, but as a young girl on a mission. And in that moment she felt seen. As she walked, her mind, as it so often did, drifted into the world of words. She would silently practice her mental dictionary, translating the signs she passed. A faded, peeling poster for a local concert became an exercise in French. The words on a discarded newspaper fluttering in the gutter became a lesson in Spanish. L'amour. L'amour. She would mouth the words, savoring the subtle differences in their sound and feel. It was her own private world, a place where she was the undisputed master. She didn't know why, but she had a knack for it. Languages just made sense to her, the way a melody makes sense to a musician or a brushstroke to a painter. They were a puzzle that she was uniquely gifted at solving. Suddenly, a loud burst of laughter and a wave of conversation washed over her. It was coming from the crowded, brightly lit diner she was passing, a place she had only ever seen from the outside. A family was sitting by the window, their faces illuminated by the warm, inviting light. The father was telling a story, his voice booming with jovial energy. He switched to a different language, a melodic, lilting tongue she immediately recognized as Italian, and the entire table erupted in laughter. She didn't understand the words, but she understood the feeling behind them. She had heard enough to know the rhythm and sound of the language, and she found a quiet joy in just listening to it, a thrill of recognition. She continued on, her heart thrumming with a mix of anticipation and nerves. Mr. Henderson's corner store was just a few blocks away now. It was a beacon, its neon sign a bright promise in the darkness. She saw it now, a small square building with a big glass window. A handful of people milled around outside, talking and laughing, their figures silhouetted against the bright interior. Imani's stomach did a small flip. This was it. The moment she had been building up to all day. The moment that would bring a smile to Malik's face. She slowed her pace, taking a deep breath, and prepared to step into the light. She had the money, she had the mission, she had the determination. She was ready. She pushed open the glass door and the little bell above it jingled merrily, a high-pitched, hopeful sound that rang out into the quiet night. The little bell above the door jangled, a cheerful sound that made Imani's heart flutter. The air inside Mr. Henderson's corner store was cool and smelled of sugar, fresh brewed coffee, and the faint, dusty aroma of old cardboard boxes. It was a world away from the humid, sticky street. The store was a small universe of its own, with aisles so narrow that Imani had to turn sideways to navigate them. Shelves were stacked high with all manner of goods, from brightly colored bags of chips to the mundane necessities of life, milk, bread, and cans of soup. For a moment she was lost in a kaleidoscope of colors and textures, her eyes wide with wonder. This wasn't just a store, it was a treasure trove. Her gaze, however, was fixed on a single prize. She weaved her way past a man with a booming laugh who was telling a story to the clerk, her small form barely noticed. She knew exactly where the chocolate bars were kept, a sacred section in the back aisle near the sodas. And there it was. Not just any chocolate bar but the chocolate bar. It was a behemoth of a thing, wrapped in a shiny gold foil with a picture of a waterfall of caramel spilling over a cascade of nuts. It was the one from the commercials, the one that promised a taste of pure, unadulterated bliss. It was perfect. She reached for it, her fingers trembling slightly, and it felt impossibly heavy in her hand. This was it. The key to Malik's happiness. She made her way to the front counter, a line of one forming behind her as she waited. The man with the booming laugh was still there, now listening intently to the clerk. He was a tall man, impeccably dressed in a dark blue suit that seemed too formal for a corner store, but he wore it with an effortless grace. His face was kind, with laugh lines etched around his eyes and a calm, quiet authority in his posture. He looked up and gave her a small, gentle smile as she approached the counter. She smiled back, a shy, hopeful smile. "Just this, please," she said, her voice barely a whisper as she placed the magnificent chocolate bar on the counter. The clerk, a kind-faced woman named Brenda who knew Imani and her family, picked it up and scanned the barcode. "All right, honey," Brenda said, her voice warm. "That'll be $1.45. Imani's heart sank. $1.45. She had taken exactly $1.50, but in her haste she hadn't accounted for the tax. Her mind raced, calculating the difference. A simple, silly mistake that now loomed like a great, insurmountable wall. She fumbled in her pocket, pulling out the small handful of coins. She laid them out on the counter, her fingers counting them again and again as if by some magic, a stray nickel might appear. $1.37. She was 8 cents short. It might as well have been $1 million. Tears welled up in her eyes, hot and sharp. This wasn't just a chocolate bar anymore, it was a promise. A promise to Malik, to herself, to her parents, that she could do something, anything to make their lives a little brighter. She had failed. The heavy disappointment settled over her like a shroud. "I'm so sorry, honey," Brenda said, her voice soft. "I can't sell it to you for less." Imani's chin trembled. She looked at the chocolate bar, then at the man in the suit who was still standing nearby, watching her with a patient, curious expression. Her mind, usually so sharp and quick, was a blur of panic and shame. She couldn't go home empty-handed. She couldn't face Malik without his birthday treat. In a moment of sheer desperation, a boldness she didn't know she possessed took hold. She turned to the man, her eyes wide with a plea. "Mister," she said, her voice cracking, "I'm 8 cents short. It's for my little brother. It's his birthday." She held out her open palm, showing him the meager collection of coins. "Please, can you help me? I promise I'll pay you back. I'll work really, really hard, and when I grow up, I'll find you and I'll pay you back." The man's expression didn't change. He simply looked from her tear-streaked face to the chocolate bar and back again. There was a pause that seemed to last forever, a breathless moment suspended in time. Then a slow smile spread across his face, a smile that reached his eyes and made them crinkle at the corners. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small, elegant leather wallet. He didn't pull out a handful of coins or a crumpled bill. He pulled out a crisp $20 bill and laid it on the counter. "Keep the change," he said to Brenda, his voice a rich baritone that seemed to fill the quiet space. Imani's eyes widened. She stared at the bill, then at the man, a wave of profound gratitude washing over her. "Thank you," she whispered, the words thick in her throat. "Thank you so much." "It's no problem at all," he said, his smile still in place. "And what's your name, young lady?" "Imani," she said, her voice stronger now, filled with a newfound awe. He nodded, and as Brenda handed Imani the change in the chocolate bar, he followed her out of the store and onto the street. The air felt different now, charged with a strange, new energy. "So, Imani," he said as they walked side by side, his long strides slowing to match her pace. "You have a little brother. What's his name?" "Malik," she said, clutching the chocolate bar tightly. "He's 5. This is for his birthday." They walked for a few blocks, the man listening intently as Imani, emboldened by his kindness, told him about her family, her father's 2 jobs, her mother's cooking, and the treasure hunt with Malik. He didn't interrupt, he simply listened, and his quiet presence made her feel safe. When she finally paused, he asked a question that would change the course of her life forever. "You seem like a smart young lady, Imani. What do you like to do for fun? Any hobbies?" She looked down at her book, which she was still clutching in her free hand. She was about to say reading, which was true, but a different answer slipped out, a truth she had never voiced aloud. "I like words," she said shyly. "I find them fascinating." "Words?" he asked, a flicker of genuine interest in his eyes. "In what way?" "I just like how they sound," she said, choosing her words carefully. "And how different languages have different words for the same thing. I try to learn them. From books and the TV." He stopped and looked at her, a genuine smile now on his face. "You learn languages on your own?" "I try," she said, her voice a little more confident. "It's like a puzzle. When I hear a word in a new language, I can almost feel what it means. I can figure it out. Like a code." The man looked at her, not with pity but with a deep, profound respect. He saw beyond her worn clothes and the poverty of her street. He saw something rare and beautiful, a talent waiting to be nurtured. This wasn't a whim, it was a calling. He had built his entire business on the idea of spotting potential, of seeing the value in things no one else did. And in this small, determined girl, he saw a gold mine of a different kind. He knelt down so they were at eye level. "Imani," he said, his voice quiet but firm, "my name is Mr. Kingston. And I think you have a very special talent." He reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a simple business card. He handed it to her, his long fingers carefully brushing against her small ones. "Keep this. When you're older, you find me. You find me and you come work for me." He stood up, gave her another warm smile, and with a small nod, turned and walked away, disappearing into the city night. Imani stood there, the chocolate bar in one hand, the smooth, cool business card in the other. It was her future, a promise of a life she couldn't even imagine, all wrapped up in a piece of paper. Imani's feet barely touched the pavement on her walk home. The chocolate bar, a trophy of her successful mission, felt light in her hand. But the business card, a smooth rectangle of thick, pristine paper, felt impossibly heavy. It was more than just a piece of cardstock. It was a physical manifestation of a promise, a tangible connection to a world she had only ever seen from afar. The elegant, embossed lettering felt like a secret whispered just to her. She looked at it again under the faint glow of a streetlight. Kingston Global Group, it read in a font that looked both modern and timeless. She burst through the front door of her apartment, the sound of her own excitement so loud in her ears it seemed to fill the whole room. Her parents were still awake, sitting at the kitchen table, her father reading the newspaper and her mother knitting. They looked up, startled by her sudden entrance. Her mother's eyes went straight to the chocolate bar. "Imani? What's that?" her mother asked, her voice a mix of confusion and concern. "Did you use the money?" Imani nodded, but she didn't feel the guilt she had expected. Instead, she felt a profound sense of triumph. "I had to, Mama," she said, her voice a rush of words. It's for Malik. It's his favorite kind. She placed the chocolate bar on the table and, with a quick, decisive movement, revealed the business card, laying it down next to the chocolate. And this is from the man who bought it for me. Her parents exchanged a look. Her father, a man of few words, picked up the card, his brow furrowed in concentration as he read the name and the company. Kingston Global Group, he repeated softly, a note of awe in his voice. I've heard of them. They're a big company, child. Very big. He looked at his daughter, his eyes full of a love so deep it ached. What did he say to you? So Imani told them. She recounted the entire story, from her being 8 cents short to her desperate plea in Mr. Kingston's profound generosity. She told them about how he asked her about herself, and she told them about her secret love for languages. Her father listened, his gaze never leaving her face, while her mother's hands stilled, her knitting needles forgotten. When Imani finished, they were silent for a long moment, taking it all in. He said he wants me to work for him, Imani finally said, her voice filled with a quiet reverence. When I get older. As a translator. Her mother reached out and took her hand, her touch both warm and reassuring. He saw something in you, Imani, she said, her voice thick with emotion. He saw what we always knew was there. A spark. The business card became more than a promise. It became a beacon. Imani carefully placed it in a small empty jewelry box she found in her mother's drawer, tucking it away like a precious jewel. It was her secret, her hope, her North Star. From that night forward, her passion for languages transformed from a quiet hobby into a focused, deliberate mission. She would not let Mr. Kingston down, and she would not let herself down. The community library became her second home. She would spend hours poring over books, no longer just reading for pleasure, but searching for foreign phrases and words, trying to decipher them as if they were ancient hieroglyphics. When she ran out of books, she would ask the librarian, a kind woman named Mrs. Elena who had known Imani since she was a toddler, for anything she had on foreign languages. Mrs. Elena, intrigued by the child's unusual request, would bring out old language textbooks, dusty dictionaries, and tattered travel guides. Imani devoured them all. She taught herself the alphabet of a language as beautiful as the rising sun, the elegant strokes of hiragana and katakana, and she would repeat the words from a Japanese phrasebook to herself, the sounds a new and exciting melody. As the years passed, the business card remained a constant source of inspiration. She would pull it out sometimes, its crisp edges a reminder of the man who had seen her. She would trace the letters of the company name with her finger, whispering her promise to him in the privacy of her room. She wasn't just learning languages anymore, she was building a future. Her days were a tapestry of school, chores, and the relentless pursuit of knowledge. She was a natural, a sponge for information. Teachers at her school were astounded by her progress. In her middle school Spanish class, she was consistently ahead of the curriculum, her pronunciation perfect, her vocabulary vast. Her teacher, Mr. Rodriguez, a kind man with a passion for his subject, noticed her talent. Instead of just giving her good grades, he would give her more difficult assignments, lending her college-level textbooks and challenging her to translate complex paragraphs. High school was a world of its own, but Imani navigated it with the same quiet determination. She took every language course she could, and excelled in all of them. French, German, Mandarin, she absorbed them all with an effortless grace that seemed to defy explanation. While her friends were at parties or complaining about homework, Imani was in her room, a book on syntax in her lap, a notebook full of intricate handwritten notes at her side. She would practice by herself, translating the lyrics of songs she heard on the radio, or writing short stories in the languages she was learning. Her parents, though they didn't fully understand the complex workings of her mind, were her biggest cheerleaders. Her father would come home from work, exhausted, and sit with her while she studied, not saying a word, his presence alone a source of comfort. Her mother would make her a cup of tea and place it on her desk, a small gesture of love and support. Malik, now a teenager himself, saw his sister not just as his protector, but as an inspiration. He would often find her surrounded by books, a serene look of concentration on her face, and he would smile, a quiet understanding passing between them. The years flew by, a blur of studying and dreaming. Imani's world, once confined to the streets of her neighborhood, had expanded. It was no longer a small universe, it was a galaxy of words and cultures, a place she felt more at home in than anywhere else. She was no longer a little girl asking for a favor. She was a young woman, intelligent and confident, with a purpose that had been a decade in the making. On her 18th birthday, the day she had been counting down to for years, her parents surprised her with a small cake and a card. She thanked them, her heart full, but her mind was on one thing. Later that night, in the quiet solitude of her room, she opened her jewelry box. The business card was still there, its edges a little worn, but the lettering still clear and sharp. She held it in her hand, the smooth, cool paper a familiar weight. The time had come. She knew she was ready. With a steady hand she reached for the phone, the numbers on the card a map to her future. The phone felt cold and impossibly heavy in Imani's hand. For a decade, this single action had existed only in the abstract. A future moment she had dreamed of, studied for, and prepared for with every ounce of her being. Now the future was the present. She took a deep, shaky breath, her thumb hovering over the numbers on the worn business card. Kingston Global Group. The name, once a symbol of a faraway, unattainable world, now felt like a destination. She pressed the buttons, one by one, each beep a small step closer to the fulfillment of a promise. The line rang twice, a short, sharp trill that seemed to vibrate through her entire body, and then a crisp, professional voice answered on the third. Kingston Global Group. How may I direct your call? The voice was polite, but impersonal like a polished marble statue. Imani's practiced response, a phrase she had rehearsed in her mind 100 times, vanished. She swallowed hard, her tongue feeling thick and clumsy. Hello, she finally managed, her voice a reedy whisper. I'd like to speak with Mr. Kingston, please. There was a beat of silence on the other end of the line, a hesitation that felt like an eternity. Do you have an appointment? The voice asked with a subtle shift in tone, a note of gentle skepticism. No, ma'am, Imani said, her confidence returning in a sudden wave. She had come too far to give up now. But I have a business card. From him. He told me to call him when I turned 18. Another pause, this one longer. Imani could almost hear the mental gears turning on the other side of the line, the receptionist weighing the absurdity of a young girl's claim against the calm conviction in her voice. One moment, please, the voice finally said, a hint of something unidentifiable in its tone. The hold music was a soft, elegant melody, the sound of a grand piano playing a gentle, unobtrusive tune. Imani held the phone to her ear, the music a surreal backdrop to the pounding of her heart. A decade ago, in a corner store on a quiet street, a man had made a promise. A simple, fleeting gesture of kindness. A promise that a little girl had taken as an unbreakable vow. And she had built her entire life around it. The image of the gold-foiled chocolate bar flashed in her mind, and for a moment she was back in that store, a small girl with a big mission. The music cut off with a soft click, and a new voice, a familiar voice, came on the line. Deeper, richer, and filled with a quiet authority that instantly brought back the memory of his kindness. This is Mr. Kingston. Imani's breath hitched. She opened her mouth, but for a second no sound came out. She was speaking to him. The man. The person who, through a single act, had altered the entire trajectory of her life. Mr. Kingston, my name is Imani, she said, her voice clear and strong. I called you a long time ago. At the store. There was a moment of silence, a pregnant pause where Imani was convinced he had forgotten. The years, the promises, the small, desperate girl, it had all faded from his memory. She was just a blip on his radar, a brief, charitable act lost to time. But then a slow, gentle laugh echoed through the phone. It was the same sound she had heard in the corner store, filled with a deep, genuine warmth. Imani, he said, and the way he said her name was a symphony of recognition. The young lady with the penchant for words and a deep love for a chocolate bar. I was wondering when you would call. A wave of relief so profound it almost made her weak in the knees washed over her. He remembered. He had remembered her all along. You said I should call you when I was 18, she stammered, the words tumbling out. You said you had a job for me. And I always keep my promises, he said, his voice now a low, conspiratorial tone. I knew you would call. I had a feeling. So, tell me, Imani, have you kept your end of the bargain? Have you been keeping up with your languages? She told him, her words a concise and confident summary of a decade of hard work. She told him about her teachers, her library books, the late nights spent with her notebooks filled with foreign scripts. She told him about the languages she had learned, not just the ones taught in school, but the ones she had taught herself. Japanese, Russian, Portuguese. She didn't boast, but she didn't downplay her abilities either. It was a simple, factual account of a mission accomplished. When she finished, there was a beat of silence, and then Mr. Kingston's voice, filled with an obvious admiration, broke it. "Imani, that is remarkable. Truly remarkable. It seems my hunch was correct. Some talents are just innate. My team is going to be incredibly impressed." "So, is the job still there?" she asked, her voice tight with anticipation. "It is," he said. "Better than what I first promised you, I think. We have an opening for a junior translator, and I think you would be the perfect fit. But first I'd like to meet you. Not as a formal interview but as a conversation. I want to hear your story, your goals. We'll get you set up with my head of human resources after that. How does tomorrow morning sound? My office is on the 37th floor of the Kingston Tower. Does 9 a.m. work for you?" Imani's world for the past decade had been defined by two intersecting streets and the small neighborhood they contained. Now she was going to the Kingston Tower, a gleaming skyscraper she had only ever seen from a distance. The thought was so overwhelming it made her giddy. "Yes," she said, the word coming out in a rush of air. "Yes, 9 a.m. is perfect." They hung up, and Imani stood in the middle of her room, the phone still clutched in her hand. The silence was deafening, the space around her feeling both empty and full. The promise had been kept. The dream was becoming a reality. Her parents, who had been listening from the living room, came in and enveloped her in a group hug. Her mother had tears in her eyes, and her father's face was split in a wide, proud smile. They had always believed in her, but this was a different kind of belief. This was the tangible validation of their hopes and prayers. The next morning she woke up before the sun, the memory of the phone call still fresh in her mind. She pulled out the only nice dress she owned, a simple, elegant navy blue dress her mother had bought for her graduation. Her mother helped her iron it, a silent, loving ritual. Her father, before he left for work, pressed a small amount of cash into her hand. "For the bus," he said, his voice full of pride. She walked to the bus stop, the city awakening around her. The familiar streets felt different, imbued with a new sense of purpose. As the bus lumbered its way downtown, she watched the city change around her. The worn-down buildings gave way to grand, soaring glass structures. The small corner stores were replaced by high-end boutiques and sprawling plazas. The bus came to a stop and she stepped out into a different world. She stood on the street corner, a small, determined figure among a sea of suited men and women, their faces set with purpose. She looked up at the Kingston Tower, a skyscraper so tall it seemed to pierce the sky. Its glass facade shone in the morning light, a brilliant beacon of a new future. She clutched her small purse, took a deep breath, and walked inside, ready to claim the future she had worked so hard to build. With Imani now at the entrance of the Kingston Tower, the next chapter will follow her first steps into her new professional life. The automatic doors of the Kingston Tower slid open with a soft, almost inaudible hum, revealing a cavernous lobby of polished marble and shimmering chrome. Imani stepped inside, the chill of the air conditioning a stark contrast to the humid morning outside. The space was immense and quiet, filled with the hushed murmur of professionals moving with purpose. A digital directory, glowing with crisp blue light, listed the tenants in a font as clean and precise as a circuit board. A security guard, with a posture as straight as a ruler, sat behind a dark desk that looked like a monolith. For a moment she felt like a small, insignificant detail in a grand machine. This was a world built on power and money, a world so far removed from the one she had grown up in that it felt alien. She walked toward the guard, her worn purse clutched in her hand. "I have an appointment with Mr. Kingston," she said, her voice a little too loud in the silent expanse. "My name is Imani." The guard nodded, his expression unreadable, and checked a list on his screen. With a quick glance, he printed a visitor pass for her, a small, laminated card with her name and a barcode. "Take the express elevator to the 37th floor, he said, pointing with a long finger. "His office is the first door on the right." The elevator doors slid open, and Imani stepped into a glass box that seemed to move with impossible speed. As it ascended, the city outside was transformed. The buildings she knew, the streets she had walked, shrank into a sprawling mosaic of brick and asphalt. The familiar world receded, replaced by an aerial view she had only ever imagined. The homes of her neighborhood looked like small, colorful boxes, and the trees that provided shade for her street were a fuzzy, green canopy. The immense scale of the city and her place within it was suddenly breathtakingly clear. The doors opened with a soft chime. The 37th floor was a world of hushed elegance. The walls were a creamy white, adorned with abstract art that seemed to float in midair. The air smelled of clean linen and expensive coffee. She found the first door on the right, a solid mahogany door with a simple brass plaque that read, Elias Kingston, CO. She took a deep breath, her heart a drum against her ribs, and knocked. "Come in," a voice said, and it was the same rich, kind voice that had spoken to her a decade ago. Imani pushed the door open and stepped into an office that felt both vast and intimate. One entire wall was a floor-to-ceiling window that offered a panoramic view of the city. Mr. Kingston sat behind a simple, unadorned wooden desk, a cup of coffee steaming in front of him. He wasn't wearing the formal suit from the store, but a simple gray polo shirt and dark slacks. He looked just as she remembered, calm, kind, and with those same gentle laugh lines around his eyes. He stood up, a genuine smile on his face, and gestured to a chair opposite his. "Imani, it's a pleasure to see you again," he said, his voice full of warmth. "Please sit." She sat down, her hands in her lap, and he sat opposite her. "I have to admit," he began, leaning forward slightly, "I wasn't entirely sure you would call. A lot of people forget those small moments. But I had a feeling you were different. You had a fire in your eyes, a sense of purpose that was truly remarkable. And you kept your promise." Imani nodded, her voice a little shaky. "You kept yours too." "I did," he said, his smile broadening. "And I've been following your progress. Brenda, the clerk at the store, is a friend of mine. She told me you came back the next day to pay her back the 8 cents. I also have a mutual friend in Mrs. Elena, the librarian. She told me about the countless hours you spent in the library and how you devoured every language book she had. I have a long-standing partnership with the library to help with their digital archiving, and she was happy to tell me about the young girl who was building a personal Rosetta Stone of her own." A blush crept up Imani's neck. She had no idea he had been watching all this time. The man who had seemed like a passing miracle was, in fact, an anchor, a quiet, guiding force in her life. I wanted to be ready," she said simply. "You are," he said, his voice firm with certainty. He stood and walked over to a small, low-slung table with a laptop on it. He opened it and turned the screen toward her. "This is what I want you to do. This is a business report from one of our partners in Berlin. I want you to read through it and then, in your own words, tell me what you think it says. Don't translate it word for word. I want you to capture the spirit of it, the meaning behind the words." He clicked a button, and the screen filled with a dense wall of German text. It was a complex document filled with technical jargon and nuanced business language, but to Imani, it was just another puzzle. The words, once a jumble of foreign sounds, now flowed into a familiar melody. It was like seeing a beautiful landscape after a long, dark night. She sat up straight, her gaze fixed on the screen, and began to read. She read through the report once, her eyes scanning the paragraphs, her mind effortlessly translating the concepts. It was a report on a failed merger, an attempt by a German firm to acquire a tech startup that had fallen through at the last minute. The language was formal, but underneath the professional veneer, she could sense the disappointment, the frustration, the careful optimism for the future. She looked up at Mr. Kingston, who was watching her with an expectant, hopeful expression. "It's about a failed merger, sir," she began, her voice gaining confidence with every word. "It seems they were trying to acquire a tech company and it didn't work out. The report says the core issue wasn't financial, but a clash of company cultures. They're trying to spin it positively, focusing on the valuable lessons learned, and how they'll use this experience to improve future acquisition strategies, but there's an undercurrent of frustration. They're essentially saying, we tried, it failed, but we're not giving up. It's a document written for investors, a way of saying, we're still a solid company, but we miscalculated this time." She stopped, the silence of the office a quiet backdrop to her words. Mr. Kingston smiled, a slow, proud smile that reached his eyes. He didn't say anything for a long moment, just watched her with an expression of deep admiration. "Imani," he finally said, "that was not just a translation. That was an analysis. You didn't just understand the words, you understood the intent behind them. That's a rare talent." He stood and walked around the desk, extending a hand to her. "Imani, welcome to Kingston Global Group. You're hired." She shook his hand, her small hand swallowed by his large one. It was a handshake that sealed a decade of hard work, a decade of dreaming. It was a handshake that said, "The promise is fulfilled." He then led her out of the office and introduced her to a young woman named Sarah, the head of human resources. Sarah was warm and welcoming. She gave Imani her first assignment, a series of business documents from a company in Spain that needed to be translated for a new client. She gave her a tour of the office, showing her the cubicle she would be working in and introducing her to the other translators on the team. Imani sat down at her new desk, a sleek, modern space with a panoramic window view. She looked out at the city, a city she now saw from a completely different perspective. Her small, well-worn book of languages was in her hand, a reminder of her journey. She placed it on the desk and smiled. Her first official day on the job had begun. She was no longer just a young girl from the neighborhood with a secret talent. She was a professional with a purpose that was 10 years in the making. Imani's first week at Kingston Global Group was a whirlwind. The office was a monument to efficiency and corporate success, a world of hushed phone calls and brisk footsteps. Her cubicle, with its ergonomic chair and large monitor, felt like a command center. Her first assignment from Sarah was straightforward enough: translating a series of business proposals from a company in Spain. Imani dove into the work with a quiet intensity, her fingers flying across the keyboard, the Spanish words effortlessly flowing from her mind to the document. She didn't just translate the text, she meticulously recreated the tone, the subtle nuances, and the underlying intent. She captured the hopeful, slightly formal business tone of the Spanish documents, making them feel less like a translation and more like an original text written for an American audience. Her first real challenge came from a man named Thomas, a senior translator who had been with the company for years. He was a tall, stoic man with a perpetually skeptical look in his eyes. He had been polite during their initial introduction, but Imani could sense his unspoken doubt. One afternoon, he approached her desk with a thick file and a look of deep frustration. "Here," he said, placing the file on her desk with a heavy thud. "See what you can do with this. We've been trying to make sense of it for days and it's a mess." The file contained a technical specification document for a new product, written by a company in Russia. The text was not just in Russian. It was filled with highly specific engineering jargon and casual, colloquial phrases that were difficult to parse. It was a translator's nightmare, a blend of formal technical language and informal, almost poetic, descriptions. The team was used to translating standard legal and business documents, but this was a different beast altogether. Imani took the file, her heart pounding with a mixture of fear and excitement. This was her test, her moment to prove that her talent was more than a fluke. She spent the rest of the day immersed in the document. She used her textbook knowledge of Russian grammar and her intuitive feel for language to unravel the complex sentences. She cross-referenced technical terms, but what truly set her apart was her ability to understand the intent. The engineers had used metaphors and turns of phrase that would be lost on a conventional translator, but Imani, with her unique gift for feeling the meaning behind the words, could see the vision. She could see the sleek design and the innovative technology the engineers were describing, not just the raw specs. That night, she stayed late, her small office lamp a solitary beacon in the quiet, expansive floor. She thought about her family and the hours she had spent hunched over books in her room. This was no different. This was just a bigger, more complicated puzzle, and she was going to solve it. She sent the completed translation to Thomas the next morning, her heart in her throat. A few hours later, Thomas appeared at her desk, the document in his hand. He looked at her, and for the first time, the skepticism in his eyes was replaced by a look of profound astonishment. This is a work of art," he said, his voice laced with genuine awe. "You didn't just translate it. You made it readable. You captured the essence of it. How did you do that?" Imani just smiled. "It felt like a story they were trying to tell," she said. "I just translated the story, not just the words." The word of her exceptional work spread quickly through the office. That afternoon, Mr. Kingston himself called her into his office. He was sitting at his desk, just as he had been on the day she was hired, but this time he was not alone. 2 other men, dressed in impeccable suits, were seated in his office. They were board members, men of immense power and influence, and they were looking at Imani with a mixture of curiosity and respect. "Imani," Mr. Kingston began, his voice warm with pride. "This is the young woman I told you about. The one with the gift." He turned to her, his smile radiating an almost paternal warmth. "Imani, the board and I have a proposition for you. We've been working on a major acquisition of a tech company in Tokyo, a company that has developed a new kind of virtual reality technology. They are a brilliant and creative group of people, but they are wary of being acquired by a large corporation. They are fiercely proud of their culture and their work, and the negotiations have stalled because of a breakdown in communication. We need you to go to Tokyo as our primary translator and cultural liaison," he continued. "It is a huge responsibility, Imani. You won't just be translating words, you will be building a bridge between two very different worlds. You will be representing not just this company, but the very idea of what a Kingston Global Group acquisition can be. A partnership built on mutual respect and understanding. It's an enormous task, but I believe you are the only one for the job." Imani's breath caught in her throat. The thought of traveling halfway across the world, of being the sole person responsible for the success of a multi-million-dollar deal, was overwhelming. It was a far cry from the small-town girl who had saved up a few coins for a chocolate bar. But as she looked at Mr. Kingston's face, she didn't see the powerful CEO of a global company. She saw the kind man from the corner store, the one who had seen her not for her circumstances, but for her potential. "I'll do it," she said, the words coming out with a firm, unwavering certainty. "I'm ready." The two board members nodded in approval, and Mr. Kingston's smile was one of pure, unadulterated triumph. She had come so far, and yet this was just the beginning. The promise made a decade ago had been fulfilled, but it had also unlocked a new set of possibilities, a new future. A future that was, in a way, just as bright and exciting as the promise of a chocolate bar. The flight to Tokyo was a long, surreal blur of clouds and time zones. Imani sat in the business class cabin, a world of plush leather seats and quiet attendants. It was the first time she had ever been on an airplane, and she found herself mesmerized by the quiet hum of the engines and the vast, endless expanse of sky outside her window. The world below, her world, was a distant memory, replaced by the glittering promise of a future that awaited her on the other side of the ocean. Tokyo was an assault on the senses. The air was a symphony of unfamiliar sounds, the polite, rhythmic chime of subway doors, the sing-song cadence of street vendors, and the low, constant hum of a city that never slept. The streets were a kaleidoscope of neon lights and bustling crowds, a mesmerizing display of a culture she had only ever studied from afar. She navigated the city with a sense of calm purpose, her mind already at work, translating the signs, the conversations she overheard, and the unspoken language of the city's rhythm. She felt a profound sense of peace. For the first time in her life, she was exactly where she was meant to be, using the gifts she had so meticulously honed. The meeting was held in a sleek, modern conference room overlooking the city. Mr. Kingston was there, along with his two board members and a team of corporate lawyers. Opposite them sat the executives of the Japanese company, led by a man named Kenji, a quiet, serious man with a sharp mind and a palpable sense of pride for his work. The atmosphere was tense, a palpable stalemate that had been dragging on for weeks. The corporate translators, two professional linguists from a well-known firm, had already been working with the team, but their efforts had only seemed to deepen the chasm. The initial round of introductions and pleasantries was strained. The translators dutifully rendered the words back and forth, but they missed the subtext. Kenji's polite, formal language was not a sign of warmth. It was a wall of respectful distance. The board members' attempts at corporate conviviality were seen as pushy and impatient. Imani watched, listening not just to the words but to the rhythm, the pauses, and the slight, almost imperceptible shifts in tone. She saw the quiet pride in Kenji's posture and the defensiveness in his carefully chosen phrases. They weren't just negotiating a price, they were negotiating a transfer of trust, and that was something the current translators simply couldn't grasp. After a few tense minutes, Mr. Kingston looked at her, a silent signal that said, "Your turn." Imani took a deep breath. She didn't sit in the chair reserved for the translators. Instead, she stood and bowed her head slightly, a small gesture of respect that instantly broke the tension. She began to speak in fluent, elegant Japanese, her voice a calm, steady presence in the room. She didn't just translate Mr. Kingston's last statement, she rephrased it, softening the corporate jargon and adding a touch of personal warmth. "My apologies for the delay," she began, her words a soothing melody. "My name is Imani. I am not only here to translate but also to share our deep respect for your company and its vision. We understand that this is more than a business deal, it is a partnership of minds. We see your technology not just as a product, but as a masterpiece, an elegant solution to a problem that has plagued the industry for years. We do not wish to own your company, we wish to join it. We wish to help your magnificent creation reach its full potential and touch the lives of people all over the world." The effect was instantaneous and profound. Kenji's tense posture softened, and a look of genuine surprise and gratitude crossed his face. The other Japanese executives, who had been listening with polite boredom, now leaned forward, their eyes filled with interest. Imani had not just translated the words, she had translated the soul of the message. She had spoken not just to their business sense but to their hearts, to their pride in their work. For the rest of the day she acted as a bridge, a quiet, guiding force between the two companies. She translated not just the numbers and the legal terms, but the spirit of the conversation. When a board member made a comment that was too blunt, she rephrased it, adding a layer of respect and humility. When Kenji spoke with a carefully guarded reverence for his team, she translated his words not as simple praise, but as a deep, profound love for his company's culture. She didn't just translate a document, she translated a philosophy. At the end of the day, a subtle but significant shift had occurred. The two parties were no longer adversaries. They were collaborators. Kenji stood up and for the first time, a genuine smile broke through his stoic exterior. He looked at Imani and bowed his head, a deeper bow than the one he had given Mr. Kingston. "You have a rare gift, Imani-san," he said, his voice quiet but sincere. "You are not a translator, you are a builder of bridges." The deal was finalized a week later. It was hailed as a monumental success, a new kind of corporate acquisition built on mutual respect. The success was attributed to Mr. Kingston's innovative approach and his brilliant new hire. Imani became a legend within the company, the young translator who had saved a multi-million-dollar deal with her unique talent. A few months later she was back in her own neighborhood, walking the same familiar streets. The corner store was still there, its neon sign a beacon in the night. She saw Mr. Henderson, the owner, sitting on a bench outside and she smiled, a quiet, private smile. She thought of the little girl she had been, a child with a few coins and a big dream. She thought of the man who had seen her not for her poverty, but for her potential. She was no longer that little girl. She was a professional, a respected translator and a world traveler. She had her own apartment downtown, her own car, and her own salary that was more than her parents had ever made in a year. But the memory of that night, of the chocolate bar and the business card, was still as fresh and as vibrant as the day it happened. The promise had been kept. The dream had been realized. And yet, as she stood there, looking at the familiar streets of her childhood, she knew this wasn't the end of her story. It was just the beginning. The world was full of stories waiting to be told, waiting to be translated, and she was ready for all of them. She was Imani, a builder of bridges, a master of words, and a girl who had found her destiny, all thanks to a simple chocolate bar. Dear viewer, if you've watched up to this point, thank you for your support. I have a small request. If you enjoy my stories, you can subscribe to the channel, and don't hesitate to share your thoughts about the stories in the comments. Enjoy watching. Thank you for listening. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel and like the video.